Hello, welcome to the Been There Got Here podcast. This is Sach, and today I wanted to talk about my health journey. Now, as I was preparing for this talk, I just didn't even know where to start. It's definitely been a journey, and I would say it wasn't until the past couple years that I actually felt like I was understanding maybe what that root cause of all my problems were. I had been struggling with, most particularly, just itchiness, eczema, digestive issues, as well as fatigue. And so if you are struggling with any of these type of symptoms, if you would just continue to listen, you might find some helpful tips and resources that have helped me along the way. I realize that everybody's story is different, especially when it comes to health. But I do think that I have learned a lot along the way, and that's what I'd like to share today. So, as of now, if I were to share my diagnoses with others over the past couple years, with the help of some wonderful doctors, I have been able to know what was going on. For about 5 years prior to this, I was really in the dark, but I was really set on trying to avoid medicating the symptoms, and I really wanted to uncover what the root cause was for my issues. So I really avoided any type of over-the-counter medication, topical steroid creams. Now, I do know at some points that some of those type of interventions are necessary, and I've had to, resort to taking something. But I did notice in some periods of my life that if, for example, I used a topical steroid cream, it seemed to make the situation or the matter worse, and I ended up having to depend on the cream, and I just didn't want to do that. All right, so today, what I guess my diagnoses would be severe inhalant allergies, as well as some mild food allergies. I was recently diagnosed with Sjogren syndrome, and the most recent being small intestine bacterial overgrowth, which is also referred to as SIBO. And so I'm going to talk about the test results and just the supplements and all of that have helped with those with those issues. All right, so in the last couple of years, I really didn't know where to turn, but thankfully with prayer, I do think that sometimes we get so overwhelmed, and I have found that I have probably seen a handful of doctors, and as much as they all are kind of pointing in the right direction, there are times when I was taking 20 supplements, that I was, kind of going to some extremes that I felt. I just felt like I was desperate for answers, and by that, I don't know if I was doing the right thing. At this point, my whole approach is a well-balanced diet. I have a very diverse, and I rotate the type of food items that I eat just because I am susceptible to sensitivities and allergies. I also take supplements, but I try not to overdo it, and I also think that I do have to keep in mind some of the herbal and the herbal type of remedies and functional foods that we tend to maybe overtake just because we think that it's a little more healthy. In addition, I've also cut out any foods that cause inflammation, so I'm gluten-free, dairy-free. And I am trying to introduce, though, some dairy, as far as I eat a little bit of goat's milk, and sometimes I do have some ancient grains, so spelts and kamut. I'm just trying to bring things back into my diet, but not overdo it. So that's why I do have a meal plan, and I try to follow that. I also have cut out all sugar, and the reason why I did that is part of my journey has been dealing with systemic fungus infection. And so cutting out sugar and really being kind of careful with my sugar intake, I do feel like making all these changes have really helped me to where I am today. And I do feel like I'm starting to eat more foods. And then when I do have a reaction, I can really pinpoint what it is. I do tend to do better with not eating so many processed foods, so that's a whole other thing. So this has required a very drastic change in my lifestyle. I cook a lot. It's just become the norm. But when you're used to not cooking a lot, this was a lot to get used to. So as I explain now a little bit more into detail, I kind of want to explain a little bit about my son. So my daughter had no issues. She's 7. But my son, when he was born, about 3 months after he was born, he started to experience some eczema. And I didn't think much of it because one of my sister's son was experiencing eczema, so I thought that it was a genetic thing. But the eczema ended up just getting worse and worse, and also my son wasn't really able to digest foods properly. Things were just going through his system. His stool was very liquidy. It just didn't look right. He just didn't look healthy. He started to get a different kind of rash on his chest where it was just an open sore wound, and he would try to scratch it. We tried to do everything to cover it, but we ended up resorting to kind of holding his arms down while he slept. It was definitely the most difficult time in my life, just because when you see your baby just going through something like that, I can't even tell you what it did to me. I was so desperate just for help. I didn't get any answers. I did end up, when he was about 13 months, finding a integrative pediatrician. So he noticed immediately that he thought it was a fungal infection, and just by putting a fungal cream on his chest, it cleared it overnight. And I had seen other doctors, and they just said it was eczema. And so after that, this doctor was great, and he started to provide enzymes and probiotics and prebiotics and just turmeric, all these various things to help inflammation. He had a stool test done at that time, and he had an issue with, I believe that his intestinal permeability, it was really high, and that's kind of, the fancy way of saying leaky gut. And also on his report, he had an issue with E. coli. So once we kind of got that all cleared, we did resort to taking antibiotics. I would say it's been a very slow journey with him. We cut out all the foods that he was allergic. We had to see an allergist, and he had an issue with avocado, dairy, egg, watermelon, and halibut. And one other allergy that I'll explain in just a bit is called alpha-gal. So once we cleared out, and at the time we only knew about 3 of them, the alpha-gal, watermelon, halibut was his most recent test, which was a year ago. So once we cleared that out, I would say that his flare-ups would come and go. He would just break out on his neck. It wasn't hives, it wasn't quite eczema, and it would go away in 3 days, but he was extremely itchy. And the only thing that would really clear it was a fungal cream. So we kind of felt like it must be something systemic, just something in his bloodstream, something going on. So anyway, that kind of explains my son. And for me, kind of similar issues were definitely going on. everything the same, except I was reacting to different foods. So I also, at the time, I think what really basically kind of, if I look back and I kind of think about what may have happened for my son, what went on about the same time is we went on a vacation, and we were in Turks and Caicos, and I ended up eating some beans that didn't seem to be cooked properly, and it was my fault. I didn't cook them properly, and they probably were really past expiration. And when I ate that, I got extremely sick. I had a horrible case of food poisoning for about 2 days. Well, soon after that is when my son broke out with his first batch of eczema. And as I've studied a little bit more about SIBO, it does seem like food poisoning could be a cause of the bacterial growth that could happen in your small intestines. So I'm kind of thinking now that may have been the case, because something happened, but I think my immune system was already at a point of just not being in the best place. I had some cavities, and about the time that my daughter, right after she was born, I put the type of filling that has the mercury in it, and when I went to go see a dentist later, the amalgam filling, when I went right before I got pregnant with my son, a dentist was just saying I need to get it removed, and I ended up getting it done twice. And the second time, I know they knew what they were doing. They had like a whole body suit on, and they had all the special equipment. That wasn't the case for the first dentist office, and I ended up reacting horribly. My whole face blew up. I ended up having to go to urgent care and get on antibiotics. I was having some type of infection, and it was in my neck and my mouth. And so all that to say, that was before my son. I got pregnant, and so anyway, the only other differences that I had that my son didn't have is I ended up getting pancreatitis. I was having a lot more hormonal issues. He was too. We both had issues with our thyroid, but I ended up having to see an endocrinologist, and they said that I had pretty much wiped out my adrenal glands, and so I was diagnosed with chronic fatigue syndrome, and also I saw a gastroenterologist because my stomach was just always in pain. About that time, the pain, they did an endoscopy and found that I wasn't quite digesting food, like there was still food after I had done, I think, like a day fast, and then also I had a lot of inflammation. So anyway, that was probably at my peak, worst breakout. It was hard being a parent of 2 kids. I was just so worn out. For 2 years, I was trying to do it all on my own, trying to find answers, and I'm going to probably share more about my faith story, but this is a time that I became so desperate that I finally just fell on my knees and cried out to Jesus for help, and I prayed for his healing there. But prior to that, I wouldn't go to him because I felt like he wasn't listening or he didn't care, when all along he did. It was just that it was my heart and my attitude. And so when it was a genuine repentance, I felt like the Lord not only healed my heart that day, but he also was beginning to heal me in so many ways. And I guess I'll go into it more later, but when I had my first endoscopy, they gave me a proton inhibitor pump or something like that. It was basically a steroid, and I refused to take it. And I had a follow-up appointment, and without taking anything, they said that my stomach healed. And in that 6-week duration is when I had this kind of encounter with God. And then from that point on, the Lord has only brought doctors that have helped me on my journey. And I know that God could have instantly healed me that moment, but I almost feel like I went on this journey to really figure out what was going on, even how to get healthy, finally getting answers that I never knew. And that's why I feel like I'm wanting to share this journey, because I think that the story is important on how we get somewhere. All right, so after that, I saw many doctors, but the most helpful had been in the past couple of years. One of them was an allergy doctor who actually was an ear, nose, and throat doctor that specialized in immunology. Anyway, he really shed light on allergies, and for me, I had seen dermatologists, I had seen an allergist, and they always had told me that skin and food allergies are not connected. But this doctor, he got into the field because his brother had severe allergies, told me no, they are in fact connected, and he was just really trying to find what was going on, what my body was reacting to. So most times I would get kind of tested, like a panel that would test the most common allergens, but he actually wanted to test everything that I eat on a daily basis, because he was thinking that I basically was reacting to foods that I, consumed too much of, that you create an allergy or a sensitivity. And I knew that was possibly the case because my diet was so limited. So after a skin test and blood work, that it basically indicated that I had inhalant allergies to ragweed, various grasses and trees, my most severe being ragweed. And then for my blood work, I had found that I had an allergy to tomato, mango, pistachio, cashew, alpha-gal, and I believe I had one other one that day. And to dandelion. And so alpha-gal, I'll just explain what that is because I wasn't very familiar with it. But based off of our history, my son and I would react to random things. Alpha-gal stands for galactose alpha 1,3 galactose, and it's an allergic response to meat allergens in patients with the delayed onset of symptoms. And so basically individuals develop a hypersensitivity to beef, pork, lamb as adults, and as I've researched more, he basically advised me not to eat any type of meat that comes from a mammal, and that's like so many things, right? So, but for some reason, they usually associate this with a tick bite. I've never been bitten by a tick, at least by what I know, and especially my son, so it was a very interesting thing, but these things were causing a lot of inflammation in our body, so we cut those foods out all along with his allergies and mine, and that really seemed to help. And then this doctor he gave me some resources that I'm going to post on our website at beenthereGothere.com. I'm going to have a blog post where I'm going to talk more about some of these resources, but he gave me a couple pamphlets, one called Brain Allergies, and it talks about all the different foods and the families that they're in. It talks about a diversified rotation diet. There's a 4-day plan, a 7-day plan. And so that was really helpful. And that's actually what I'm doing right now. I'm actually on I'm not following it to a T, but I'm on a 7-day different plan where I diversify the meat that I eat, the grains that I take in, the vegetables, plants, vegetables and fruit. And what was so interesting is he also gave me a chart because there are certain foods that are associated with pollen allergies. So because ragweed is one of my highest inhalant allergies, watermelon, cantaloupe, honeydew, zucchini, cucumber, and banana have the same are associated with the ragweed pollen. So when I'm kind of in a flare-up or it's a spring, or fall for certain types of grasses and trees when it's more severe. I just have to kind of be a little bit more on guard. I also find because it's hard for me to digest certain foods, I can't really eat a lot of raw foods, and I know this goes against all the recent trends, but cooking things really helps me digest foods and not have so many issues. I found that I was having more issues with vegetables. So anyway, all that to say, I will link more of that information. My doctor that actually referred me to this doctor, she's a PA who specializes in integrative health, and she did some lab work on me. One was from True Health Diagnostics, and what was interesting, it just kind of confirmed some suspicions, but I discovered that I have the MTHFR gene mutation. I only carry one gene, so it's heterozygous, and it's the gene mutation C677T. I kind of suspected this because my sister, Nika, she had some issues with miscarriages, and she had a homozygous gene mutation, so we knew that both of my parents were carriers. I'm not sure if it was for the same C677T, but all that to say, that was something that was interesting, and a little bit more about the gene mutation, particularly the C677T. The enzyme has a profound influence over everything from hormone regulation to body toxin removal and nutritional deficiencies. It's commonly associated with heart disease, heart attack, stroke, blood clots, miscarriages, and so much more. And so my son actually got tested, and he has the same gene mutation that I do, and my daughter doesn't. So I don't know if that's why we have more issues with detox removal. That's why we have eczema, because even of what dermatologists have explained is our skin is our biggest organ, and so if we have issues with detox, like with our liver being overloaded, our skin is going to be maybe the next choice, because it is our largest organ, and that's how it tells us something's wrong or that we're detoxing. So also something that was brought to my attention was the Sjogren's syndrome, and I was really surprised by this because I know one person that has this, and I thought that maybe, like, when it came to autoimmune disorder symptoms, lupus with the rashes and other ones, even Hashimoto's, because of the issues that I was having with my hormones, they seemed to be more of like a likely fit. But every time when I did see an endocrinologist, I didn't fall under those categories. So with Sjogren syndrome, typically signs and syndromes are dry eyes or dry mouth, dryness in other areas including throat, skin, nose. Additional symptoms may include fatigue, fever, joint pain. So the only thing that really may have been something I could say, yeah, I do have that, is the fatigue. The risk factors are family history, which I don't know of anyone in my family, a viral infection, such as cytomegalovirus and Epstein-Barr virus, and that's the only one that seems to be a possibility, just because I did get tested for cytomegalovirus when I was pregnant with my son, my recent pregnancy. It was something that I requested just because when I was in graduate school, I did a project on cytomegalovirus because it's related to my field of study, and they told me that I did have it in the past, but I didn't get it with this pregnancy. So that could be how I got this issue with my immune system, but I guess I'll never know. So those were just some interesting things, and if you kind of combine them, the reason why I was so unsure even about my inhalant allergies, I'm not on any type of any type of seasonal allergy medication. I've been recommended, but I don't deal with itchy eyes or, runny nose. Yes, I do feel like my immune system does get flared up, and maybe that's how my body tells me, but I don't know if my Sjogren's and the inhalant allergies are kind of counterbalancing, because I don't have any issue with being like super dryness, and maybe it's because I'd have an excess with my allergies, and it's, like I said, balancing out. So that's kind of my explanation, just because it didn't make sense to me. So for those two things, I'm actually not doing anything. I'm just really trying to monitor my diet and taking certain supplements, and just not too much. But I will talk a little bit more about those supplements later. One other test that the PA did for me was a stool test, and that was done with Salvio. And the thing that came up with this, and this was actually the same company that my son's pediatrician, when he was 6 months old, also used, but intestinal permeability was also the issue for me. So that being leaky gut, and 85 and over is considered high. Mine was at 100.4. So even with the, I know I've had inflammation in my stomach. I know I've had stomach pain, but this was definitely showing with the intestinal permeability. And as far as bacteria, it did say that I had H. pylori, which could confirm the issues that I had as a child, like 16, with ulcers. I had a lot of ulcer pain, and I had to see a gastroenterologist as a child because of those issues. And at the time, a lot of times H. pylori, they test it with a blood test, and I've had it done probably 3 times based off of my stomach complaints, and it was always negative until I had a stool test. So because I did all this when I was pregnant and I'm still nursing, I didn't go the route that they had recommended, which typically is antibiotics. I probably won't do that, just because the last time I took antibiotics, it really set me back a lot. And so I do have some resources that my doctor has given me that could be helpful. I actually haven't had any stomach pain in, I would say, in at least a year. I used to have it every day. So I do believe that my stomach is healing. It's probably not as bad as it was at some points. Another thing that this same doctor tested, she sent off labs for, was called the ALCAT, which is a test that tests food sensitivity. So not IgE, but the reactions that might come, like delayed reactions. And I think this one tested, I think it was either 400 to 600 food items. Also, they test functional foods and medicinal herbs, antibiotics, molds, preservatives, food additives. It was very informative. They have 3 categories: severe, moderate, mild, and acceptable, no reaction. So 4 categories. And I had a lot in severe, and they were for foods that, again, surprised me: sweet potato, white rice, white potato, broccoli, lettuce. It was a lot of foods that we would say, oh, those are, the safe foods for allergies. So the whole goal with that is you, for 6 months, remove the foods that you're most severe. And since they tested so many foods that are acceptable, you kind of introduce those in your diet. There's a 4-day rotational diet, depending if it's non-reactive, if it's mild, and you have to stay away from the moderate and severe for a time. And then what's great about this company is you can set up a 30-day consult, and the person that works there will walk you through things and also help you come up with this plan. So I did this for 6 months, and it was very helpful. And I do think that there was a lot of even healing that I experienced internally, just because when you do eat a lot of foods that you're sensitive to, I do think that it could create an even bigger problem. My allergist said that could even create a potential allergy. And I think that's what happened for me with dandelion. When I'm pregnant, I have issues with my gallbladder, and so something to help with that, a natural way, is dandelion root. And so I would drink that tea on a daily basis. And when I did my blood work, was it 6.9 or 7, I was a 4. but I don't know, I didn't know that, and I thought that it was healthy. So once I eliminated that from my diet and all the other foods that were, bothering me, I do think that that was very helpful. My son also did this, and so for 6 months we avoided it, and then the whole goal is you add in foods. You add in foods that are going to, over time, that you avoided. You want to add in the foods that you eliminated, because by then you can retest and see if they are affecting you in any way. And so we are now adding a lot more variety into our diet, and then what's great is you can see if you react to it. If for me, I know immediately something's bothering me, and so then you can know what it is since you're reintroducing slowly. All right, so those were some of the things that I wanted to talk about. I wanted to talk a little bit about the small intestine bacterial overgrowth known as SIBO. So how I ended up kind of looking more into this is all the doctors that I was seeing were already providing enzymes. They were saying that, we either had fungus or a bacterial infection, so we would get, various things to take supplements for these things. But when I researched, I actually did a quiz, and I'm going to post this information, but it's a doctor by the name of Amy Myers, and I had come across her when I was dealing with my thyroid issues. And basically there's a little quiz that you can take that kind of suggests what you might be dealing with. It obviously promotes that you should, have a relationship with a doctor. So for me, I was able to connect my lab results and say, yes, this makes sense. But anyway, it suggested this, and it really made sense to me. And so they have there is a recommendation of how to use this protocol with children that was very similar that my pediatrician that my son had used. So I thought, why not, but try it out, the method that this other practitioner described. So typically the other doctors would recommend giving the whatever was going to kill the bacteria or fungus, and then an hour later they would give an activated charcoal that would basically I'm sorry, I got a little distracted. I'm explaining what the SIBO protocol is. So typically you would just take the actual antimicrobial, whatever, the fungal medication, and then maybe take an enzyme along with it. But this method is you take the enzyme, and the enzymes are very specific, and what the enzyme is trying to break down is something called biofilm. And biofilm, the best way that I can describe biofilm is, imagine a swamp that has rocks in it, and if you look at it, there's maybe like a slimy substance growing on the rock. And anyway, that's kind of what biofilm can be visualized as. It's basically a film, and it spreads easily, and basically it's really hard for any of the supplements that you take to penetrate, or if it does, it doesn't get all of it. So what you want to do is remove the biofilm so that whatever bacteria is there, you can get to it. Anyway, I'm sure that it can be explained much better at other if you type in biofilm, but there's certain enzymes that help. And these enzymes you give, about 30 minutes later, you give whatever, bacterial, fighter, or fungal thing you're trying to combat. You give that, and then an hour later, you give an activated charcoal or anything that will bind to it to take it out of your system. I think there's modified citrus, there's various things that you can take. And what I did is every day I gave a different thing for either bacteria or fungal. And these were things that my doctors have already prescribed. And so all that to say, I did this for 6 weeks, and I did this about 3 months ago. And I found the greatest success with it. My son would break out randomly, and he's had no issues at all. And I know this is probably a little TMI, but when he first began to do this process, his stool was very slimy and green, and he even showed me. And then it became more normal. And that to me, I don't know if that was removing it. I know some people say that it's helpful or it's not, but it seemed to be really good for us. And up until this point, my son's been eating more things and not reacting. So I do think this could have been even contributing way back to, when we first got the bacterial overgrowth. And I don't know if somehow I gave this to him. I'll never know, but I'm taking it day by day, and this is really helping for not ever having to take medication or anything like that. I can tell when my son is doing well, and he hasn't broken out, and he's actually eating more foods. So it's such a good thing, and I'm hoping that the more that he heals and that permeability in his intestines gets strong, that I can introduce some of those foods like egg eventually, and that he would be okay. So that's the goal. So anyway, all that to say, I haven't attempted it myself just because I am nursing, and so I probably will try it at some point. I would say I'm at a really good place, but I'm still kind of struggling with rashes time to time. And again, it's mainly with processed foods. And if I stay away from things, it's fine. But about 3 weeks ago, I had sardines, and I immediately had a stomach ache. And right after that, the next day, I broke out with eczema on my hand, and then I started to feel really tired. Well, anyway, I think I had some kind of food poisoning because the stomach pain, I felt really sick. And it kind of reminded me of, the intestinal overgrowth. And also canned, sardines have really high amount of histamine. So as soon as I realized that, I stayed away from high histamine foods, and I didn't have to really do too much. I already try to stay away from inflammatory foods. So it went away in 5 days, and my eczema's gone. Now, sometimes my flare-ups would last months. This was nothing, and so I feel like that's where I'm at. I'm just at a much better place where I really know what's going on. So anyway, those are kind of the things that I wanted to share. I think one other thing that was really helpful, and this is something I did about 3 years ago, is when I was living in Texas. I found a doctor that was doing something called ozone therapy, and he was an anesthesiologist, but now he's focusing on integrative health practices because his wife was having a lot of health issues that she couldn't find answers. So when after I had that moment with God, I literally found this doctor who lived 5 minutes down the street from me. And I explained to him my history, and he told me that he thought that ozone therapy would help. So I'm going to go ahead and add that website to my blog, just because I feel like by reading it, you would get a much better idea about what it does. But the procedure just basically involved like taking out a portion of my blood, adding the ozone to it, and then running it through I believe like a ultraviolet light, and by doing that, I think it killed bacteria and all the things that could have been causing the systemic infection. And then in addition to that, I got some IV vitamin C and vitamin B. I think Myers cocktail is the name. I did 10 of these, and it really helped me because, again, that was my worst flare-up, and I was able to kind of do this immediately after. So anyway, there's some other things that he prescribed that were really helpful, and you can kind of read more about his approach one of the things that he recommended that might be worth anyone looking into if you're having adrenal fatigue or any autoimmune issues, he recommended hydrocortisone. It's not the type of cream. It's actually, he said, it's actually, you have to get prescribed, but it's something that you take, like a pill that you have to get from a pharmacy. And it basically is something that's depleted, that you're getting your natural supply back in your system. So anyway, something to look into. I did do that for a time, and I would say I was feeling the best, and God was just so good to bring these amazing doctors along my path. And I just thought a little bit, I would just kind of, before I kind of get into my recommendations, just do a real quick timeline of the journey of where it started and where it ended. That way, if anyone kind of can relate to the symptoms, everything that I said, it might make more sense, or the supplements might be something to look into. So when I was 16, it all started with my stomach aches. I'm not sure if it was H. pylori, but it was confirmed that I had ulcers from an endoscopy. When I was 18 years old, this is kind of a very controversial issue, especially, in these times. But I do think it's a big part of my story, and hopefully, I know that for every case it's different. And so, when I was 18, I had signed up to participate in a vaccine research study at my university, and I signed up. It was a Gardasil study in particular. Well, anyway, the first time that they gave me this vaccine, my eyes swelled shut and my arms swelled up, and the researchers told me that I couldn't take it anymore. So that was fine, and I just thought it was that particular, vaccine. Well, I did follow up, and I just also do think that this is something, worthy to note, is I was actually given the placebo. And so I was reacting to the additives. It would be so great if vaccines were just saline in the actual disease that, they're trying to prevent you from getting. But a lot of times they add various things into it so that your body will react to it. And so for me, as soon as I had that first shot, which ended up being the placebo, and I reacted to eggs 1 month later, and that was my first reaction to eggs that I've ever had. I grew up eating eggs probably every other day. It was such a big part of my, diet. So from that day, I haven't been able to eat eggs. Well, about 3 years later, I was going to graduate school, and my health records show that I never got my second MMR shot as a child. So I didn't question it. I got it done, and again, I had a horrible reaction, and I ended up breaking out with eczema for the very first time in my life. I never had it as a child, and I remember going off to graduate school. It was so noticeable. I first started experiencing brain fog, and so I didn't know what to think. I saw my dermatologist it was my first time I've ever seen a dermatologist. They said that this is genetic and you'll deal with it for the rest of your life. You'll need medication, like the creams. And I kind of thought, why didn't I deal with this earlier? Anyway, after that, I dealt with skin problems ever since then. And I think mainly detoxing. It was really hard for me to detox from that point on, maybe even of what they put into my system. I started breaking out with different kinds of rashes, dark patches all over my body, which I think are called tinea versicolor. It's actually a fungus. And if you look more into what are put into vaccines, I think a lot of them are actually cultured in fungus. And so that's why the systemic yeast infection or the fungus infection could make sense for me. But this is all can be found on the CDC. You can look at the ingredients that there is egg protein. There's also different DNA from animals, all these things that make our systems react. And, there is a small population that don't do well with them. And I feel like I fall into this category, and some other people might. And if you read that there is a label that we should get when you're given a vaccine. It'll talk about the people that shouldn't take it. A lot of those are people who have allergies with egg or that have autoimmune issues. And anyway, if that was a fact, then I probably should have stopped there. But I ended up, a couple years after that, when I was working in a hospital, I got the flu shot. And that was, my arm swelled up so big. On the spot, I had to go home. I was sick for about 5 days, couldn't even get out of bed. I was deathly ill. And from that point on, my allergies got worse. And my next allergy was to pistachio. And then it became a lot of tree nuts. And again, this was all new stuff. So my immune system was definitely being affected. And I really, that's kind of at the point where it got the worst for me. And so again, this is really controversial, and I think that it's good for some people to know this stuff, because there is a population where that's why there is a compensation court. There are people who do react, and they have to end up going before a court, and they get compensation because they had these side effects. And anyway, from that point on, I decided God sent a friend in my life that just kind of made me question, or she said that we had a choice and we didn't have to. And I remember thinking, okay, I can't do this anymore, because I started to recognize the connection for me. So soon after that, I mentioned getting the dental fillings, and then about 31 was when I had my son, and we had that food poisoning incident. And from that point, I had about 2 really horrible flare-ups, and a lot of it just was skin issues, breakouts, issues with eating, digesting, stomach aches, the pancreatitis episode that I had. So it was a very scary time, and especially, when you're a mom to 2 young children, you want to be in good health. So I would just say, just to kind of wrap it up, I'm going to explain some of the things that I've been doing. I did kind of already explain how I've been eating, how I've changed my habits. We don't eat any sugar. It does really help I do feel like the systemic fungus, all of that seems to be better, but we are still sensitive to, I guess, like candida, if you were to hear that term, like that overgrowth. We have to be very careful. My son and I and my daughter, just my whole family, we all eat the same now. But we've really changed the way that we eat. And for me, it might be hard for other people, but for me, I feel like it's actually made me understand like food and what's healthy and nutrition, and also even how to cook. I cook every meal, and it can be tiring initially, but it's now part of my norm. And I do think that my children are benefiting a lot more from getting a more diversified, and I'm definitely more aware of nutrition and a balanced diet and all of that now, more than I was when I had my first child. And so some of the supplements that we take right now, I will go ahead and post that, but my son and I, we take enzymes for our food. It does help, like if we're eating meat or various things. He takes it, and I take it often too. I take a probiotic that specifically I found for people who deal with SIBO. It's just a strain that's more effective. Methylated vitamins, also for folate, just because of the MTHFR gene mutation. If you take folic acid and other type of supplements, it can actually be harmful to you. Also, I take vitamin C. We take a powdered form that we sprinkle on all of our food, and that really seems to help. Also, I take, my allergy doctor recommended to take he recommended to take zinc and magnesium, and I guess I take vitamin D and I think that's basically it. I was taking a lot more in the past, but I have found that I'm actually doing a lot better with just keeping it a little more simple and not taking as many things. And I feel like it's the same for my son. I do take quercetin, which helps with histamine reaction. So if I do feel itchy, if I take that really seems to help, and especially in these seasons where I might have a flare-up. And also there's another product that I take by Amy Myers that deals with histamine. And I'll go ahead and link some of that. I know I'm not including everything. I can't find my list, but basically those are the main things that we take. And of course, sometimes I might take a omega-3 or something, but compared to before, sometimes I feel like just trying to have a well-balanced diet and just good nutrition and, getting good sun and all that stuff is probably just all that I need. And also, I guess another thing to just keep in mind is just any products, if you are itchy. I know that you'll even hear it from doctors, but detergents, there's one that I use that I'll post up that we all seem to do well with, and I've had to really look at the soaps that we use, because again, when you deal with health issues, you tend to want to go to the extreme of more like plant-based things, because you're trying to stay away from chemicals. But I find that I actually do worse with plant-based products, and so there's certain products that I just can't use that make me itchy, and you just kind of have to, again, when you find that root cause, all the other things will kind of fall into place, and you'll realize what works and what doesn't work. So I know I mentioned a lot, and I'm going to post as much as I can that hopefully will make this make sense. But if you have any comments or questions, you can go to our website, beenthere.com, and there's a comments section. You can also email us at beenthere.here@gmail.com and communicate with us that way. Our next episode is going to be Nika. She's going to talk about her health journey with her son. He's dealt with more food allergies, and so it's actually even though it's related to allergy, it's been different things have helped us along the way. Different lotions, different creams, different supplements. I think we've only shared one doctor, and so all that to say, we will follow her story with conversation, a dialogue of just, talking it out with each other, because I would have to say my sister was really there for me in my darkest times when I needed someone to talk to. And so that's kind of the whole point of this, is you shouldn't feel alone. There are others who are going through the season, and my biggest advice would be, if you are if you believe in God, to seek Him. And if you don't, that you can go to God. You can open up your Bible, you can pray. That's what I did. I was getting so far away from my faith. I started questioning things, but honestly, I'm here today and I'm doing well because God is so good. And He's provided answers, and He's provided healing, and that is going to be something we also talk more about after we talk about our health journeys. So anyway, just stay tuned, and you will hear Nika's story next.